Hello there, it's Harper. Welcome to Pages and Reels. Today I wanted to discuss different interpretations of the three witches in Shakespeare's The Tragedy of Macbeth. Macbeth is my favourite Shakespeare play, followed closely by Titus Andronicus. The witches in Macbeth have always intrigued me, and the way they are interpreted by different adaptations has always been one of my favourite aspects of watching the play. In this video, I will just focus on movie adaptations, but of course, even then, I can't do all the movie adaptations. That would take ages. So this is a list of the Macbeth adaptations I will discuss. 1971, directed by Roman Polanski. The 2006 version, directed by Jeffrey Wright. The 2010 version, directed by Rupert Gould. The 2015 version, directed by Justin Kurzel, and The Tragedy of Macbeth, 2021, directed by Joel Cohen. I have also included a bonus, which is Macbeth in the BBC One series, Shakespeare Retold, 2005, directed by Mark Brozell. Okay, so Macbeth, 1971, directed by Roman Polanski. I would say Polanski's version is the traditional, conventional version of the witches, the way it was most likely intended by Shakespeare. The witches are clear outliers of society, living on the outskirts of the community, the first ones who would have been burnt at the stake if they had actually lived through the medieval and Renaissance periods. I do like how one of them is clearly younger than the other two, so you immediately, or well, I immediately assumed that she's like the apprentice that does a lot of the physical work for their spells or something. Of course, you need adaptations that follow the traditional imagery of Shakespeare, but I find them the least interesting. Three ill-intended witches who mess with Macbeth's mind. Are they actually able to see the future, or do they just take pleasure in setting off a domino effect because they know how human psychology works? That's the ongoing question though, isn't it? Most interpretations don't ever really directly and explicitly answer this question, and I don't feel like this movie does either. But here's something to consider. Maybe the witches don't know themselves. Maybe they do have some mystical powers, but where do those powers start and just an understanding of human psychology end? If you have a mix of these things, it would then take a lot of self-awareness and reflection to understand which is which, as in what comes from your mystical powers and what just comes from your intellect and human instinct. If you don't have these skills of recognition, then it would all just come out in a jumble and make you seem crazy, which is exactly what happens here. The witches just seem like three crazy women that Macbeth chooses to listen to because they tap into his hidden craving for power. They might just have a deep instinctual understanding of human nature, the political landscape, and patterns of human behaviour, along with some mystical powers, but Macbeth, blinded by his greed, only latches onto the mystical aspect of their words and not common sense. It's like, dude, you showed loyalty and bravery, so you were bound to get some kind of promotion. You don't have to have magical powers to know that's most likely going to happen. The overall feeling you get from the witches in this movie is one of unease, and set against the dreary natural landscape, they kind of camouflage into the boulders, bushes, trees, and I guess that was the point. Like, the witches are not part of civilized, ordered society, but at one with the wildness and wilderness of the natural elements. Macbeth 2006, directed by Jeffrey Wright. I have a soft spot for this version because it's Australian. Yes, my accent is Australian, if you couldn't tell already. It's the city accent and not the broad rural one you often hear in Hollywood movies to show that the character is Australian. Also, just a side story because I want to tell it. I don't actually recall what my opinion of this movie was when I first watched it at the cinema. because it was just after I had found out my crush was in a relationship with someone else, and I silently wept all throughout the movie. Funny, huh? I couldn't see the screen because the tears were just streaming down my face, and it blurred my vision. Anyway, I do like this interpretation of the witches. I like how their faces don't match their attire, because clearly they're supposed to be teenagers with the school uniform and everything, but their faces look much older, and I feel like it implies they know more. They know things teenagers wouldn't and shouldn't. They also seem ill-intended and behave like juvenile delinquents. So my backstory to them is that they were once typical rebellious teenagers who were friends, and they were drawn to the dark arts. And after initially just dabbling in it, they fell deep into it and ended up with much older faces, because knowing things before your time will do that to you. But they still retain their adolescent recklessness and engage in petty misdemeanors like vandalism. Also, just a note, I know this means that Macbeth engages in the despicable behaviour of taking psychotropic substances and engaging in adult activities with underage girls. So let's just assume they're actually not teenagers. Their involvement in the dark arts escalated the aging process, and Macbeth somehow knows this. So, yeah, okay. The adult activity scene with the four of them reminded me of an early 2000s music video with all the swirly camera work and neon lighting. Something that did make me laugh, though, was that despite the Shakespearean language used in this movie, a lot of the characters and mannerisms and gestures were so Australian that it was kind of comical because it was so jarring at times. Macbeth 2010, directed by Rupert Gould. The witches in this version are openly evil and hostile. I love the juxtaposition between their malicious nature and the fact that they are nurses. We, of course, typically associate nurses with kindness and compassion, and to see this idea completely brutalized is eerie to me, especially against the icy cold color palette of the movie. They speak with such venom too, like they just loathe humanity, almost growling inhumanely at times. There is one scene where they kind of remind me of the faceless nurses in the first Silent Hill movie, especially when their bodies are contorting and the sound of weeping reverberates in the background. It's so haunting and unsettling. And even here, we just don't know if they are the cause of Macbeth's downfall or just able to see the inevitable. But here's another lens to look through. What if the witches in this version are just sick of humanity? You know, the context is war after all, where you see just the worst of humanity, and maybe the witches are just fed up and think, you know what, just go ahead and kill yourselves and let us help you. You're going to do it eventually anyway. That would warrant the hatred in their voices. Interesting, huh? So yeah, I like this interpretation a lot, and the nurse spin I thought was cool and unique. Macbeth 2015, directed by Justin Kurzel. So this movie also takes the traditional interpretation of Macbeth, but I think gives the witches a bit of a spin. Similar to Polanski's version, the witches look like stereotypical mystics, bedraggled and female, but a sadder version where they're not antagonistic at all. They just kind of seem despairing and speak softly, gently, as if grieving themselves for the battle-worn soldiers. It's harder to know their intent because they seem to hold no malice. The addition of the children also was thought-provoking. The theme of children is ongoing in this version. The movie opens with the funeral of Macbeth's child. There is a focus on a soldier who barely looks like a teenager, who is then brutally killed in battle. You kind of root for him to survive, and so his death, though just a minor character, still manages to tug on your heartstrings. Especially the way he dies is just so heartbreaking. Also, Lady Macbeth, who hallucinates her dead child when she has her breakdown, and tying Lady Macduff and her children, and not just one child like in the play, but 3. She has 3 kids in this version. They tie her and her 3 children to stakes to burn them is just so horrific. I guess the addition of children adds a more haunting element to the overall movie because innocence, amid such horror is so terrible to see. Also, in the scenes where the witches have children with them, you can't help asking yourself, who are they? And are they the witches' children? Were they stolen? Were they given or created? And what will become of them? The quote, "The earth hath bubbles as the water has, and these are of them," is perfect for how the witches are shown in this movie. They seem to move with the mist and then disappear into it, sifting in and out of scenes, and they're just like a fog. Even when they're present at Macbeth's death scene, their expressions are neutral, just observing without any response to the carnage. I guess kind of like the universe. It just is. Nothing's personal, even when catastrophic natural disasters happen and lives are destroyed. It's not that the universe is either good or bad. It just is. The Tragedy of Macbeth, 2021, directed by Joel Cohen. Give Catherine Hunter all the acting awards there ever was for her portrayal of the witches in this movie. Phenomenal. I mean, whoever came up with the concept for this version also needs to be given a raise. So unique, so creative. I love it so much. I have watched her scenes over and over again, and if you haven't watched them, please pause this video right this second and go watch it. I can wait. Okay, I'm going to assume you've watched it now. I feel like Hunter had a lot of fun with this as well. There's something gleeful, taunting, almost childlike in this interpretation, heightened by Hunter's diminutive size. I feel like the nature of this interpretation is almost the sister version of the Shakespearean fool, who is usually male. Their cartoonish, odd manner belying the biting, acidic truths in their words. I also love how you don't know if there are actually 3 of them or just one who can split into 3 different versions of herself. So is she just talking to herself? It's so innovative. And her voice, that gravelly contralto voice, just adds another level of eerie otherworldliness to the characters. You can't or you don't imagine that someone so tiny, because Catherine Hunter is tiny, to have such a deep, raspy voice. I could go on about her performance for hours. I was literally rendered speechless when I first watched her. I wonder who was involved in the choreography, because her movements would have definitely needed training, maybe with a contortionist. She moves like a very flexible crow. A crow's mannerisms is what she's clearly imitating for this version. So yeah, anyway, very cool, very memorable. So the bonus that I added was Macbeth Shakespeare Retold, 2005, directed by Mark Brozell. So I wanted to add this one because it is unique, even if it's not my favourite. I thought the concept was interesting, the witches being garbage collectors, but it just wasn't cohesive with the rest of the movie, and it kind of seemed out of place. There's barely any indication they're mystical, so if you don't, or if you didn't know the story of Macbeth, which I'm sure some people don't, and you just saw this movie, you would think, who are they and what is the point of them? They changed the gender of the witches, which is cool, but it was difficult to conjure a backstory for them, which I tend to do. The context of this version is set in a restaurant, and Macbeth is the head chef. And I guess the witches were garbage men because restaurants create a lot of garbage. But I don't know why the witches would target Macbeth. With the other versions, you could see the connection between Macbeth and the witches and why they might target him specifically, but here it just seems so random. I also wanted something more unsettling, like I don't know, maybe they're guests in Macbeth's restaurant and he later finds out that only he could see them. But here they just, I don't know, they just don't belong in the story. And they don't get much screen time anyway, so it's like they're almost redundant. I don't know. It just seems like I'm trashing this version now, but I did like the concept. So maybe that's why the presentation of it just was so disappointing that I just wanted to comment on it. It just needed something more, I thought. Speaking of disappointment, I know that some of you might also be feeling disappointed because I didn't cover some of the more iconic adaptations of Macbeth, such as Orson Welles' version and Throne of Blood. So maybe I will later do it down the track sometime. But anyway, regardless, I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, bye!